Hooray! T-shirt. Must be summer. Okay. We're on to Augustine. Here's a little fact file for him. Name Aurelius Augustinus, aka Augustine of Hippo. Nationality North African. Born in Tagaste, Numidia. Dates 354 to 430, very precise. Appearance not known, but he's probably black. Before he was famous, a student, a rhetorician, yes. Famous for writing, theology, author of Confessions and City of God, among tons of other stuff. Why does he matter? He shaped the thinking of the Western Church more than any other theologian save Paul. He shaped ideas on original sin, just war, salvation by grace through faith, and even predestination. Could you have a drink with him down the pub? No, I think so. Just don't get him started on his mother. Confessions of a Church Father. One of the churchmen who condemned Priscillian as a heretic and a Manichaean was the greatest theologian of his time, Augustine of Hippo. Hippo, I should point out, is not a reference to his size, but to Hippo Regius, a Roman city in what is now Algeria, the place where eventually he ended up as bishop. Augustine's life was one of conflict and turmoil. In the background to his writing is the slow, messy spectacle of the decline of the Western Roman Empire, while in the foreground is the slow, messy spectacle of Augustine's struggles with himself. Because he spoke no Greek, his ideas have had virtually no impact on the Eastern Church, but possibly only Paul himself has had more influence on the Western Church. He was raised in a small town in North Africa. His father, Patricius, was a pagan, his mother, Monica, a devout Christian. She was the most important influence in his life, but at first Augustine dismissed her simple Christianity. His parents saved all they could in order to send their gifted boy to university at Carthage. And typically, the freedom and irresponsibility of university living led him astray, at least in his mother's eyes. He began to paddle in what he later rather sensationally called Hell's Black River of Lust. He did try to read the Bible, but he found its contents truly appalling, full of villainous kings, foolish superstitions, and silly fairy tales. These were not for Augustine. As a sophisticated cosmopolitan Roman, he studied the great pagan philosophers. And he did other sophisticated Roman things as well, like taking a mistress, who bore him a son, and becoming a well-known teacher of rhetoric. Everything was going swimmingly. But he was tormented by inner anxieties. In particular, he looked at the world and wondered where all the evil came from. Since this was 1500 years before Simon Cowell, he couldn't come to the same conclusion that most of us do, so he looked around for another explanation. For 9 years, he was a Manichae, as in the Persian dualistic sect, as opposed to a manatee, which is a large aquatic mammal. He was not a large aquatic mammal, even though he came from Hippo. But Manichaeism too began to wane for him. He moved to Rome, and then Milan, and dabbled in Neoplatonism. He moved to Rome against his mother's wishes. On the quayside, she clung to him and refused to let him go, hoping that I would either come home or take her with me. Augustine convinced her that the boat was not due to sail till the next day, so she went off to visit the nearby tomb of St. Cyprian. He and his mistress then immediately got on the boat and left. And then he met Ambrose. Augustine had not been much impressed by the Bible, which he thought crude and simplistic. Ambrose's sermons, on the other hand, were rich and deep. Gradually, Augustine felt himself pulled towards Christianity. He was pushed as well. In Milan, his mother caught up with him. Augustine was always tied to her apron strings, not literally, obviously, and she now took him in hand. She persuaded him to find himself a proper wife, which meant sending away the woman he had been living with for 12 years and the mother of his son. The son stayed with them. He was devastated by this, but even so, when he writes about her in his autobiography, Confessions, he doesn't even tell us her name. They found a suitable candidate from a nice family, but she was underage, so he had to wait until the engagement could be announced. In the meantime, he found another mistress and had, in effect, a breakdown. One day, he was sitting in the garden, racked by guilt, beating himself up. Literally, actually, he was tearing his hair and punching himself in the head, when he heard a child's voice singing, Tolle, lege, sorry. Take, read. It was the voice of God. A command. He rushed to a copy of the letters of Paul, which he had placed on a nearby bench, opened it and began to read. Let us live honourably as in the day, not in revelling and drunkenness, not in debauchery and licentiousness, not in quarrelling and jealousy. That's Romans 13:13-14. The command struck home. Augustine was converted. He resigned his teaching post and decided to become a monk. He and his son were baptized by Ambrose, and his mother died, happy that her life's work was complete. Few mothers have had a more profound effect on theology than Augustine's mum, Monica. She was later canonized, but today Santa Monica is better known as a suburb of Los Angeles. Somehow I don't feel this is quite what she would have wanted as a memorial. Augustine returned to North Africa to set up a Christian community. In 391, he visited a town called Hippo Regius and found the church there struggling. He was persuaded to be ordained priest, and soon became bishop, remaining in post until his death in 430. He was never tempted to leave, partly because Rome was increasingly chaotic, and partly because he suffered terrible seasickness. For the rest of his life, he battled with the guilt of his past. He became ashamed not only of his mistress and his lusts, but of sex itself. We've seen already how the church had begun to prize celibacy. This was given a further boost by Augustine's theology of original sin, which he saw as completely bound up with sex. For Augustine, original sin was a sexually transmitted disease. In this, as is so often the case, Augustine's personal problems shaped his theology and proved hugely influential. In Hippo, though, there were other battles. He discovered that the Donatists were still around. Augustus, along with Aurelian, Bishop of Carthage, tried to persuade the Donatists to return to the fold. But the grievance was too old and too bitter. I said Augustus, I think it's supposed to be Augustine. Anyway. They started out talking, but these talks soon descended into violence, in an ancient equivalent of religious terrorism. More or less exactly the kind of sectarian violence we have seen in recent years in Lebanon or Ulster or Nigeria. Augustine lost patience. He backed the most extreme government intervention. He became, in fact, an apologist for persecution, providing theological justification that he based on a deliberate, terrible misreading of one of the parables of Jesus. Jesus told a story in which a king holding a banquet ordered his slave to go out into the roads and lanes and compel people to come in, so that my house may be filled. Luke 14:23. The feast was the church, the king was Jesus. It was the duty of the Christian imperial regime to punish heresy and recruit people into the church, by force if necessary. The problem was that Augustine didn't speak Greek. While the Latin text has the word compel, the Greek originals read, bring them in. Mind you, he came up with other examples too. God had violently converted Paul, he said. He was not loving to someone to tolerate wickedness, he claimed. He did not approve of execution, of course, but a bit of violence is okay. And in justifying this, he uses a phrase that becomes rather chilling in this context. Love and do what you will. Nothing wrong with Augustine, with a bit of tough love.